In this video, I'm talking to psychotherapist John-Paul Davies about grief, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a pet, the loss of a job, the loss of our health can put us in a place of wide-ranging and complex emotions, anywhere from anger to pain, to denial, to avoidance. And where it's unresolved, it can lead to other mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and even the sense that we don't want to be here ourselves because we don't know how to carry on. Therapy provides a confidential, a safe place to hold all of these difficult emotions, and that's what this conversation is all about. I hope you'll find it helpful. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Lindsay Percival. I'm a medium and a psychotherapist, and with me is my colleague John-Paul Davies, who's also a psychotherapist. Hi, John-Paul.
Hi, Lindsay. Thank you for having me on.
And we're here today to talk about grief and loss. And just to say that if you are going through a period of grief and loss at this moment yourself, then we extend our condolences to you at this difficult time. So what we're really going to focus in on is just unpack what even the process of grief looks like, and how we can help in that process within psychotherapy. So how do you see that, John-Paul? Because I'm sure from your own clients and maybe from your own personal experience, you have some thoughts about this.
I mean, I think in terms of the process, there is a standard model of the process of grief and loss. But I think the thing as well, which is really important to bear in mind, isn't it, is how complex it can be for all kinds of different reasons, and how different it can be for different people as well. I remember when I first started out as a therapist, I used Google Ads to advertise to people, and you had to do search terms. And I was amazed that the most searched term, double the amount of all the others added together, so including anxiety, depression, addictions, was bereavement, because of how difficult often people can find it. So yeah, it's hugely, because I also think it sits a little bit differently to things like anxiety, depression, addictive behavior. And it can also be the process that people go through with bereavement can be delayed or interrupted by things like anxiety and depression and addiction. So they all sort of overlay each other, and it's just a complicated process. One person's process of grief is different to another's. And I suppose the other thing to think about as well is, because of, I believe, what we do with tears and sadness in culturally, generally, which would be that for most people, they would be something that would help make us feel uncomfortable, possibly, or we'd avoid it, whether that's our own tears or seeing someone else's. I think that's something that's really interrupts people's process of grieving hugely. One of the things that you might say would be movement in terms of bereavement has, unlike perhaps addictive behavior more, or anxiety, depression, but grieving with tears, the actual act of crying, that's something that I think has been is prevented for a lot of people. So people are left much more perhaps sitting in that place of anger or fear than they are actually grieving the loss or feeling the loss of that person. So I think there's lots of different elements to it, but generally to say it's one of the most difficult things that human beings can go through. Probably is the most difficult thing.
It is, and as you touched upon it there, there's people come sometimes with this expectation of they should be over it, or
Mm,
enough time has passed, and kind
mm,
of friends and partners and people around and work colleagues are saying, well, haven't you got over that now? And
yeah.
I always say, loss isn't something that we get over. Losing a loved one, losing a pet, losing something and somebody that's so dear to us, we don't ever get over it. There's no getting
Mm,
over it. But we, as you say, we move through what
mm,
is quite a complicated process that can involve anger, that can involve fear, that can touch upon moments of depression, anxiety, even people feeling, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to be where my loved one
mm,
is. And yet somehow we're still expected to get on with it, and not everybody would even think of, well, let's see if I could find somebody to help me with that process, maybe contact a therapist.
mm,
And you see that the reason I wanted to speak about it on this channel is as a medium, I and colleagues who work in this way can help provide that evidence that your loved one is okay in what we call the spirit world, that they have passed through this difficult transition that we call death, but they are out of pain, they're free, they're not suffering. Um, but we still need to come to terms with that loss. And so mediumship isn't the whole of the answer either. So how can therapy help them? Because you've spoken about tears there.
mm,
What do you think it is that helps unlock that grief can be so stuffed down sometimes?
mm. Well, I think, generally therapy would be a place where it's much more focused. If you look at the training for therapy, it all starts with person-centered, doesn't it? Which is looking at someone's experience of it, reflecting back their experience of it. So allowing someone to be and go through the thoughts and feelings that they go through, and give somebody space to do that. Because something that really comes up, I mean, in some ways, coming up, which is brought up as well by beliefs about what happens when you die. Those things can really affect how you see death and experience grief as well, can't they? When we experience a loss, if we're talking to other people, they will often look at our loss in the way that they would have experienced their own loss. So, there are some people, for example, who've lost a parent. If your relationship with your parent, you would speak to them every day, and they were a huge part, very dominant in your psyche. Some people would continue with a sort of, in some ways, a codependence on their parents, as they may in other relationships. To lose that person is absolutely devastating. To other people who would have had a much sort of less connected, perhaps less dependent relationship with the parent, to lose that person, or even they didn't feel that great towards that person at all. They may have gone through abuse situations, but generally, when someone else is talking to us, I think, as we all probably do, we will filter that experience to our own. So we had a very close relationship with our parent, we will think, well, that's devastating for you, or that must be devastating for you. Or if we didn't, we may be more open to someone having a different experience of grief. So I think that's that when we're talking to people generally, that's often what happens, isn't it? Somebody talks to us through their own experience. And of course, therapists will have their own experiences of grief and bereavement, and what happened with their parents and their partner. But generally, it's much more a space where someone is allowed or able to the whole idea is to facilitate someone's own experience of it, and without judgment as
That's it.
well.
That's it. And I don't know if you feel this, but sometimes I feel I write a lot of permission slips for people.
Mm,
It's okay to grieve, and it's okay not to grieve if you had a very complicated relationship with, say, for example, your parent or your spouse, and you're in fact left with a feeling of relief that they're
right.
no longer here. Then
Mm,
that's okay. That's your experience.
mm,
And, very often difficulties arise because of expectations, like I should be sad, I should be this, I should be that, I should be. But as we know in therapy, there are no shoulds. that
Mm.
just really honoring that person's experience and providing that space for it. So yeah, I think it's important to say that not everybody experiences loss in the
Yeah.
way that we might say. There is no normal to this, as in lots of things.
Totally. And, therapists wouldn't be rushing through something. We would probably be used to very used to tears. Might see tears differently to the way that a number of my clients would. I think a lot of people, when they start to cry, going back to the tears, is they might apologize or say sorry when they start to cry, or be reluctant to do it. I think that sort of survival part of us, status, those sorts of things, how we appear to others, the message that often comes through is tears would be a sign of not doing great or weakness. Or whereas in this situation, there'll be an indicator of love, of the presence of love. People don't, in the context of grief, it's you have to have loved someone to feel sadness, and inevitably you will feel that sadness if they're not going to be there anymore. So yeah, I think it's multifaceted and complicated as well by things like anxiety and depression. And I remember doing some training years ago on bereavement and working with grief. And I was really surprised that most of the time, what the trainer was doing was talking about anxiety, was talking about depression, and perhaps addictive behaviors as well, because they can really interrupt the process. So again, if you're sitting with a therapist, they can hold that space of the grief and the loss, and then also look at anxiety as well, and we'll be familiar with working with that with people. Similarly with depression, similarly with addictive behavior. If somebody loses a partner and there's been a reliance on substances, that could ramp up, and that will inhibit somebody's going through the process and really experiencing the losing that person. So yeah, therapists will be familiar with working with grief and all different types of experiences that people have, and also these other aspects of people's psychological well-being, which are directly going to affect what the process of grieving is like.
That's it. And grief can, especially complicated grief, traumatic grief that's, sort of dammed up
Mm.
in a person, can lead to so many other more complex mental health problems. And as with anything, the longer that time goes on, the more difficult it is to almost unravel. And just going back to what you were saying there about tears, because I was speaking with a colleague within the context of a spiritualist church, which is often, where I work, and we will have boxes of tissues, okay? And very often what happens is people come rushing to the person who's crying, and give them the box of tissues, because I think there's still this discomfort of being with people who are just so openly expressing their emotion. And I was saying that in our training is entirely the opposite, isn't it? We don't offer tissues. We don't push the box nearer to our client. We don't talk through that process where silence and stillness actually helps a person to get in touch with deeper layers of feelings. And sometimes, I wish those two worlds would intersect a little bit more between therapy and mediumship, because we could learn so much about that. But, sometimes the not crying is also because people don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable, or they don't
Mm.
want to express their anger because they don't want that to come across in a way because of fear of judgment.
Mm. Completely, yeah. And yeah, there is a discomfort that people will often experience. You can understand where it comes from, isn't it? We all want people that we love, or even people that we don't love, but straight, to be okay and happy, and it's an indicator that something isn't that way. But I always remember hearing about tears. It's very much like going through a tunnel, and there's a light at the other end, so that you have to feel it, you have to go through it. And then some people get beliefs that they'll cry forever. You know, if they start, they won't stop. All these sorts of beliefs that can become internalized that mean that people won't allow themselves to do that. So they don't then move through something. I remember hearing somewhere, I don't remember what the exact quote is, I often half remember quotes, but they did say, you know, find people who cry when they look at you and who you look at you when they cry. And I think that's a really, yeah, it stuck with me since, particularly in the context of being people's therapists as well.
Yes. Yeah, and you talk there also about anxiety and depression, and
Mm.
yet, I can recall instances from my own psychotherapy practice where the whole process of grief has been medicalized. So,
Mm.
people at a very early age, if they've experienced loss of a loved one, a caregiver, a parent, that they've been put on medication
Mm.
without any support and been on medication for years, which seems to me, quite shocking because, whilst medication can be helpful,
Mm.
I don't know what your views are on that, but there needs to be some kind of therapeutic intervention, holding of that space within that people can actually come into terms with what's impacted them.
Definitely. I mean, I think if you look at something like anxiety, when, say, if somebody's lost a partner who they've lived with for decades, you know, one of the first things that needs to be thought about is that practical thing of what that partner used to do. It's either not done now, somebody else needs to be paid to do it, or the person's going to need to do it themselves. If somebody has a tendency to anxiety and is quite fearful in life anyway, you can see how they're going to feel so on top of the grief that they're experiencing. They're going to feel much less safe in the world. That, you know, we can do all kinds of things with a partner or a parent, can't we, as far as anchoring ourselves psychologically to them, even anchoring ourselves externally. They sort of make decisions and choices. So I can see why, if somebody was a bit anxious anyway, a lot of people are a bit anxious, but you know, that was a part of life. Similarly with depression, felt hopeless, helpless. That this person not being present anymore can hugely amplify somebody's fear. So, yeah, medication from that point of view, I just think, I mean, ideally, I think things can be worked through within therapy. I think within therapeutic relationships, for some people, what they're experiencing is so intense as far as their fear or their depression that, at least temporarily, some medication is going to be helpful. But the whole idea of therapy, I think, is to, in the medium to long term, is to be able to go through life without reliance on medication. I remember, in terms of medication, somebody saying, you know, you can't medicate forever for a lack of love or a lack of connection, which ultimately, but in this situation with grief and loss, it's that loss of connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, and a profound loss of connection for some people. As I say as well, it's a very different experience. Some people are angry. That's what, you know, they're disappointed on the loss of someone, that they didn't have a parent that would have been great or a partner that would have been great. It's very complicated, and like
Yeah.
I was saying, with therapists, there's space for every experience to be spoken about and held within that space.
And I suppose one of the things that happens, it's also a loss of identity, isn't
Mm,
it?
of course.
Because, I'm not that person I was when that person was here.
Mm,
So there's an existential moment of coming to terms with, well, who am I?
mm,
What does my life look like afterwards?
yes.
I can't imagine
Mm,
my life afterwards. That's why you hear of people who kind of, I want to jump in the grave after them.
mm,
I want to go with them. Why didn't I go at the same time? This is too painful. Um, because it calls on so many things, really,
mm.
of digging deep and creating a new life for yourself. And sometimes that's unimaginable for people.
Completely, and that that what somebody experiences there all needs to be honoured, doesn't it? We might get into habits of saying to someone, "Well, they wouldn't want you to be that upset. They wouldn't want you to." People hear that kind of thing a lot, and as you say, there's some time limit would seem to be put on how long somebody can grieve for when it's always going to be sad, isn't it? I think there is that at first that loss dominates life, but then things do start to come in around it, often for people. But the loss is still felt and probably always will be. But the identity thing is, I think, is really interesting, that aspect of it, because one of the most common questions, even if somebody's not coming with bereavement, is who am I? One of the things that a lot of people would struggle with most is mapping their internal landscape and knowing who they are as a person. That, when we did our therapy training, I remember an exercise in the first year where somebody kept asking, "Who are you? Who are you?" And we would have to keep answering that question. So I just think the identity and who we are is, people can lead highly functioning lives with complicated jobs and families and not have an answer to who they are.
That's
And
right.
if you then couple that with they're losing a parent, so that identity of child or spouse or whatever it might be then is taken away in that way. It's just, it's got a profound effect on people's lives psychologically.
Yeah. And I suppose one thing to say here, and perhaps this is almost a topic for another day in another discussion, but the way that spirituality and spiritual beliefs can also actually interfere
Mm.
with the process of grief, because in our tradition, where we know, we believe that people exist in another dimension next to us, that still doesn't take away that profound, whatever it is, sadness, anger, that we had, and of missing that person while they were here. And so in a way, sometimes spirituality, oh, they're in a better place, they're in a good place now, they're out of pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not.
Mm.
We're still in what we are. And even I, as a medium, might have and might know what I know to be true. That
Mm.
has not helped me in my need to come to terms with loss that I've had in
Mm.
my life. And in
Mm.
fact, probably looking at it in one way, the loss of my mother at an early age, 55 when she died, I was in my late 20s, was in fact what took me to therapy, because that complicated grief around that I just thought, toughen up, get on with it. Life's dealt you a difficult blow. There you go.
Mm.
So just to say that spirituality and what we call spiritual bypass, which is something that we train and we look at, we understand it. Spirituality does not always help us with what is a very deep human need.
Yeah.
Grieve and intensely grieve our losses in whichever way that is.
Definitely. Yeah, it can be an avoidance, I suppose, can't it, of
Yeah,
the ending, that actually of the physical ending, can't it? The people describe physical pain in the chest with grief as well. It's physically painful.
that's it.
It's not just a psychological. Well, psychological and physical will be, of course, directly connected to each other anyway. But yeah, and a lot of what people might say could be things, well, you can talk to them now, you see them again, those kind of things, which can be helpful, can't they? They are the hope and belief that we'll
Yeah,
see someone again and communicate with them.
yeah.
Is a psychologically helpful experience, and also it's to the extent that it means that people are denied their pain.
That
It
that
is, yeah.
that's right. Denied their pain. And
Yeah.
this is really my whole reason for starting this channel, to have these conversations and these discussions from, experienced professionals and practitioners in the field, to understand where psychology and spirituality meet, that both are necessary, and that one in exclusion of the other, I think we're missing a trick. So, John-Paul, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming onto this channel, and maybe just say where people can find you as an experienced YouTuber, and you talk about lots of different aspects of mental health on your channel.
I do. Thank you. Yes. So if you just search for John-Paul Davies, IES, well, the details will be below the video as well. But then my channel's there. Yeah, range of things, bit about career change, but general mental health topics as well. Yeah, it'd be lovely for people to take a look. And it's been great talking to you. I think it's such an interesting subject, often avoided subject as well. As human beings, we might often
Avoid difficult
understandably.
conversations, difficult things, and
Yeah,
and I think to a
yeah,
great extent as well, death is still a taboo topic.
yeah,
It's still greatly misunderstood. It's still greatly feared. And I think any conversation that talks about death, dying, and grief, and our experiences of it, personally, I think that's helpful. But I'm sure viewers will let us know. So you can always pop your comments below this video, and anything that you'd like to see going forward. So thank you very much, John-Paul.
thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much.